The sun had not yet risen, and the dim light of early morning enveloped the small village. In the old kitchen of a house with a tiled roof, Mr. Smith, a 70-year-old man, was busy preparing. His thin, weathered hands gently arranged freshly picked bundles of vegetables into a large basket. Bright green water spinach, glossy purple eggplant, and a few small pumpkins were neatly organized, waiting to be sold at the market. At his age, Mr. Smith's life was far from luxurious. He should have been resting, but he still wanted to work a little to earn some money for his daughter, and for himself. His children were all working far away, and his wife had passed away long ago. Every morning, he woke up early, riding his old bicycle with the basket of vegetables to the market. For him, the market wasn't just a place to make a living, it was a place to talk and socialize with his old friends. That morning, like every other day, Mr. Smith carefully checked his basket and placed it on his trusty bicycle. He pedaled down the road, the chilly morning wind brushing against his wrinkled face. Yet he felt warm inside when he passed the main road near the market. Mr. Smith carefully steered his bicycle around the parked cars. Suddenly, as he was about to turn into a small alley, his bicycle wobbled, and a loud crash sounded. He was startled. His bicycle lost balance, and the basket of vegetables fell, spilling some vegetables and eggs onto the road. He looked back and saw a shiny black car parked by the side with a long scratch on its body. Mr. Smith stood frozen for a moment, his heart racing not because of the pain, but because of fear. He knew he had caused a big problem. "Oh no, how could I have scratched such an expensive car?" he muttered, his hands trembling as he tried to gather the spilled vegetables and eggs. Just then, the door of the car opened, and a young man, well dressed and angry, stepped out. He looked at the scratch on the car and then turned to Mr. Smith. "Hey, old man, what do you think you're doing?" the young man shouted angrily, attracting the attention of the people around. Mr. Smith bowed his head and spoke softly. "I didn't mean to. I'm sorry, I'll pay for the damage." "Do you think you can pay for this? Do you know how much this car is worth?" The young man cut him off, his voice growing louder. People nearby started to stop and watch the argument. Mr. Smith's face turned red from embarrassment and worry. He quickly said, "I'm really sorry. My bicycle just slipped. How much will it cost to fix it? I'll try to gather the money." But his apology only seemed to annoy the young man further. He stepped forward and pointed his finger at Mr. Smith. "Gather the money? How long do you think it will take to get that kind of money? It's your fault, you should pay. Why aren't you at home resting instead of disturbing others?" The harsh words pierced Mr. Smith's heart. He could only lower his head, his hands trembling as he picked up the spilled vegetables and broken eggs. Amid the tense moment, a woman's voice came from behind. "What's all the commotion? What's going on? Why are you yelling at an old man like that?" Everyone turned to look. A sophisticated woman, dressed in an elegant outfit, stepped out from behind the car. Her sharp eyes conveyed both authority and calmness. She walked over, her designer handbag swinging by her side, and her high heels clicking steadily on the pavement. She surveyed the scene, a luxury car with a scratch, an old man bent over picking up fallen vegetables, and a curious crowd around them. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice deep yet commanding. The young driver, who had just been yelling at Mr. Smith, turned to face the woman. His expression immediately softened into one of respect. "Ma'am, this old man scratched your car while riding his bicycle. I'm just handling it," he explained politely. "Handling it? Handling it how? Why are you yelling at him like that?" the woman asked, her gaze sharp. The young driver was taken aback and didn't dare to speak further. Seeing his reaction, the woman turned to Mr. Smith and spoke more gently. "Are you all right, sir? Did you hurt yourself?" Mr. Smith raised his head, his eyes red from distress and shame. He shook his head and spoke with a quiver in his voice. "Thank you, miss, I'm fine. I just accidentally scratched the car. I'm so sorry, truly sorry." The woman looked at him for a moment before nodding slightly. Her expression softened, but she still maintained an air of seriousness as she turned back to the young driver. The car is scratched, but it's not that serious. Why are you yelling at him? Don't you know how to behave? Yes, old, and accidents happen. We need to resolve this, but not by bullying the elderly. The young driver bowed his head, speaking softly. I'm sorry, ma'am, I was too hot-headed. The woman sighed and shook her head, clearly unsatisfied. She turned to the crowd that had gathered around. Please, everyone, go on about your day. I'll handle this, she said. The crowd slowly began to disperse, but no one left entirely. They simply moved a little farther back, their eyes still fixed on the conversation. The woman looked at Mr. Smith and smiled gently. Please calm down, sir. I'm not the kind of person who will make things difficult. This is just a small scratch. But could you explain to me what happened so I can understand better? Mr. Smith let out a sigh of relief, feeling comforted by her words. He bowed his head and explained. I went to the market early this morning. My bicycle slipped and I bumped into your car. I didn't mean to. I'm really sorry. If you need to repair it, I'll try to gather the money. I will try to gather the money to pay for the repairs. I know this is my fault, Mr. Smith said. The woman listened attentively, occasionally nodding but not interrupting him. After he finished, she smiled gently. Sir, there's no need to worry so much. I can see you are sincere and responsible. The scratch on the car is very minor. There's no need to make a big deal out of this. However, the young driver still seemed annoyed and spoke up. But ma'am, it's still his fault. If we just let it go easily like this, what will people think? What if someone else damages the car in the future and just says sorry to get off the hook? The woman frowned, her voice firm. That's enough. It was a mistake, yes, but you cannot speak to him like that. Do you know how old he is? Do you know what respect for the elderly means? Her sharp words silenced the young driver. The crowd around them began to murmur, their gazes shifting from sympathy for Mr. Smith to admiration for the woman. One person in the crowd spoke up. She's right. It's rare to see someone show respect like that for the elderly these days. Mr. Smith felt comforted, but also guilty for causing trouble. He hesitated before speaking again. Thank you so much for understanding, but it's still my fault. Please let me know how much the repair will cost. I'll try my best to pay it. Before he could finish, the woman raised her hand, signaling him to stop. No need, sir. I don't need the money for the repairs. But do you have children or relatives? Perhaps you could call them here so we can discuss how to resolve this. Mr. Smith nodded, took out his old phone from his pocket, and with trembling hands dialed the number. Jack, it's Dad. Please come to the main road near the market. I need your help. On the other end, a young man's concerned voice responded. What's going on, Dad? Are you okay? I'm on my way. After hanging up, the woman smiled calmly and said, Let us wait for your son. Everything will be fine, sir. Don't worry, we'll resolve it. Mr. Smith nodded and felt a bit more at ease, though he had no idea that his son's arrival would bring an unexpected turn to the situation. Less than 20 minutes later, a motorcycle approached at a fast speed. The rider was Jack, Mr. Smith's only son. He stopped quickly, removed his helmet, and hurried over to the crowd standing around the luxury car. Dad, are you okay? Are you hurt anywhere? He asked, quickly checking his father over, his face full of concern. Mr. Smith shook his head, his voice tinged with sadness. I'm fine, son. I just accidentally scratched someone's car. I'm sorry, but the driver insists on me paying for the repair. I called you here to help because I'm not sure what to do. Jack turned to look at the shiny car with the long scratch on its body. What caught his attention more was the driver's irritated attitude. Unable to control his anger, he shouted, It's just a small scratch, and you're making a big deal out of it? This is my father! He already apologized. Isn't that enough? Why are you yelling at him like that? The driver frowned, ready to argue, but the woman beside him quickly raised her hand to stop him. She turned calmly to Jack, her eyes sharp yet composed. You're his son? She asked. Jack nodded, still fuming, and answered, Yes, I'm his son. This was my father's mistake, but your driver's attitude is completely unacceptable. Are you the owner of the car? If you want the repair, I'm willing to pay for it, but I want to accept my father being bullied. The woman smiled gently, her expression wise yet warm. Calm down. I am the owner of the car, not your driver. I have no intention of making things difficult for your father. He has already sincerely apologized, and I don't see this as a major issue to make a fuss over. Her words were like a cold splash of water, cooling Jack's anger. He stood silently for a moment, his expression shifting as he assessed the situation. He then nodded and said, If you say so, I thank you. But my father will still take responsibility. We will pay for the repair. Mr. Smith quickly grabbed his son's hand, his voice filled with concern. Jack, I've told you, I didn't do it on purpose. She's not trying to make things hard on me. Don't stress out too much. Jack remained stern, however, turning to face the woman with a determined look. My father was in the wrong, and I don't want him to be seen as someone who causes trouble and refuses to take responsibility. Please tell me how much the repair will cost, and I'll take care of it. The woman smiled again, shaking her head. You seem like someone who is straightforward and responsible, but let me remind you, this issue doesn't need fixing. The scratch isn't significant enough for me to repair. What matters more is the attitude of everyone here. She then turned her cold gaze toward the driver. You know very well that I don't tolerate disrespect. I've told you many times not to treat elderly people with such arrogance. I'm very disappointed in you. The driver lowered his head, unable to say anything further. The air around them grew quiet. Suddenly, the woman turned back to Mr. Smith, gently bending down to pick up a few of the fallen vegetables. These are the result of your hard work. Let me compensate you for the damaged vegetables and eggs, she said. Mr. Smith immediately waved his hand, shaking his head. No, you don't need to do that. I've already caused enough trouble, and now you want to compensate me? But the woman insisted, taking out a large bill from her wallet and handing it to him. Please take it. This isn't for the car repair, but to compensate you for your effort. Consider it as buying the vegetables and eggs that were damaged. The crowd around them started murmuring again. Some were impressed by the woman's kindness, while others were surprised by how the situation had been handled. The way she handled the situation made Jack's heart soften. He bowed his head and spoke to the woman. Thank you for not making things difficult for my father. I was too hot-headed today. I hope you can forgive me. The woman smiled and replied in a gentle, yet meaningful voice. It's nothing. I just hope you and your driver learn a lesson. Never let anger overpower your respect for others, especially the elderly. The world is already chaotic enough, a little kindness can make everything better. Her words left both Jack and the crowd in deep thought. Just when it seemed everything had calmed down, the woman turned to Mr. Smith and added, You are a good man. You've taught your son a valuable lesson about responsibility and humanity. I truly admire that. Her words were like a warm ray of light to Mr. Smith, but he didn't realize that this was not the end of the surprises in the story. After everything seemed to have settled, the woman looked at Mr. Smith and Jack again, her eyes thoughtful, as if contemplating something important. Finally, she smiled warmly, but with deep meaning, and spoke slowly. Sir, I don't want to cause trouble for you or your son, but I do want to share something with you before I leave. Both Mr. Smith and Jack were taken aback. They listened with respect, while the crowd around them stayed a little longer, unwilling to leave. The woman continued, her voice soft and filled with emotion. Actually, I understand your situation very well because my family was once poor, too. I grew up in a rural village and saw my mother sell vegetables at the market to raise my siblings and me. Every time she faced a problem, I'd wonder why people were so cold toward hardworking people like her. As I grew older, I promised myself that I would never forget those days and that I would never let anyone's dignity be harmed because of material things. Her words left Mr. Smith and the crowd speechless. Some began to whisper to each other, looking at the woman with admiration. That car might be expensive, but it's not as important as human kindness. A scratch on the car isn't worth much compared to the value of respecting the elderly or empathizing with hardworking people like him. He apologized, and that's enough. No compensation is needed. The woman turned to Jack and continued, You are a good son, protecting your father. But sometimes, instead of getting angry, we need to learn to speak calmly. Your father has taught you about responsibility, but I think today, you should also learn a lesson about patience and listening. Jack remained silent, his thoughts deeply affected by her words. He bowed his head and quietly replied, Thank you. I will remember this. Suddenly, the woman turned to the driver, her gaze now stern. And you, she said. You work for me. But your attitude today has been very disappointing. I don't need a skilled driver, I need someone who knows how to show respect and empathy toward others. Remember this, if you continue to behave this way, you won't be working for me much longer. The driver lowered his head, unable to say anything else. The atmosphere around them grew silent. The woman then turned back to Mr. Smith and Jack, reaching into her handbag and pulling out a business card. She handed it to Jack and said, If you need help with work or anything else, feel free to contact me. I'm always ready to help those with determination and kindness. Jack, somewhat flustered, took the card and read it. He was taken aback when he saw that she was the CEO of a large corporation in the city. The woman smiled gently. Don't be surprised. I'm just someone who has gone through hardships and understands the value of kindness. She gave a slight bow to Mr. Smith, then walked toward her car. Before getting in, she added, I hope your life continues to go smoothly. Please take care of your health and keep living well, just as you have. The car slowly rolled away, leaving the scene. The crowd began to disperse, but their eyes still lingered with admiration for the woman who had just left. Mr. Smith looked at the business card in Jack's hand, sighing with relief and smiling. See, son? There are still good people in the world. She really understands, he said. Jack nodded, his eyes filled with respect. He realized that life wasn't just about responsibility and pressure, it also had room for kindness and the valuable lessons we learn from the people we unexpectedly meet. As the luxury car disappeared at the end of the road, the atmosphere seemed to calm. Mr. Smith remained standing, his eyes following the direction the woman had gone. A feeling of gratitude and lightness filled his heart. He didn't know what the future held, but he was sure that as long as he kept kindness and respect in his heart, everything would be okay. Jack turned to his father and carefully helped him gather the remaining vegetables that had fallen. In a deeper voice than before, he said, Dad, I was wrong today. I was too quick to anger and didn't think about your feelings. If it weren't for her, I'm afraid things might have gotten worse. Mr. Smith smiled kindly, his eyes filled with compassion. Jack realized that this was a good lesson. It's better to not always use a stern tone to solve problems, especially when we don't fully understand the other person, Mr. Smith said. Jack bowed his head and remained silent, reflecting on the words. It seemed that he had learned more than just a lesson from the woman. He had come to understand the importance of calmness and respect in every situation. The people around them began to disperse, but the story of Mr. Smith and the woman remained the topic of conversation. An elderly woman selling goods nearby looked at Mr. Smith with admiration. You're really lucky to meet such a good person. I've lived here for years, and it's rare to see someone wealthy who's as kind as she is. If society had more people like her, life would be so much easier, she said. Another man added, Yes, she not only taught her driver how to respect others, but she also made us all reflect on our own behavior. Mr. Smith felt both touched and embarrassed. He nodded gratefully and turned back to Jack. "Let us finish gathering the vegetables, son. Let us move on, we still have work to do." Jack nodded and helped his father gather the remaining items. Despite this, his thoughts kept returning to the business card the woman had left behind. That evening, when the two of them sat together at the small wooden table in their modest home, Jack took out the business card and read it. Elizabeth Adams, CEO of Sunrise Corporation. Jack pondered for a moment before turning to his father. "She said if I ever need anything I should contact her. Do you think I should try?" Mr. Smith was surprised but nodded. "Why not? But remember, no one can help you forever. If she gives you an opportunity, you must work with your abilities and your kindness." The next morning, Jack decided to call the number on the card. After a brief conversation, he was invited to meet Mrs. Adams at her office. With sincerity and a positive attitude, Jack quickly secured a new job in her company, one that matched his skills. As time passed, Mr. Smith's life remained simple, but his smile grew brighter. Jack, too, matured not just in his career, but in how he treated others. He learned patience, how to listen, and how to value the small but meaningful things in life. Every time he met his father, he shared new lessons he had learned at work and from his thoughtful colleagues. He often spoke of Mrs. Adams, the woman who had not only changed his life but also taught him the value of empathy and kindness. The story of the noblewoman, the old vegetable seller, and the driver slowly became a legend in the market. It was shared as a lesson on humanity, civility, and kindness. One peaceful morning, as Mr. Smith sat on the porch sipping his hot tea, he suddenly smiled when he saw a luxury car pull up in front of the gate. The person stepping out of the car was none other than Mrs. Adams. "Good morning, sir. I happened to be passing by and thought I'd stop by to visit you," she said. Mr. Smith invited her into his home, his face lighting up with joy. They sat and talked about life, about the simple but beautiful things. Before she left, Mrs. Adams left him with a piece of wisdom that he would always remember. "Do you know, sir, kindness is like a seed. If it's planted in the right place, it will sprout and spread. And today, you are the one who planted that seed in my heart, and in the hearts of those around us." Mr. Smith sat quietly, watching as Mrs. Adams' car drove away. A warm feeling filled his heart, and he thought to himself that perhaps, no matter how difficult life gets, as long as we maintain kindness and compassion, everything will turn out fine. This story was just a small incident. It was proof that in a busy and chaotic world, kindness and respect are timeless values. If everyone knew how to plant the seeds of kindness, the world would grow more beautiful every day.